Good evening, everyone. This is John Kimmel from Pride PEI. I see participants just joining us now for our first Pride Zoom of the Pride Festival 2020. I see 21 folks on the call, including our speakers and panelists. While folks are continuing to trickle in, we'll be just getting started in just 1 minute. I hope everyone's had a great Monday and a good start to the Pride Festival. Perfect, and let's get started. We've got 25 folks between us and those attending. I'd like to everyone to our first Pride Zoom here. And I'm not clicking on the right part of the tab, of course. I'm going to do this in front of everyone. I wanted to get started with our Safer Spaces statement here for Pride PEI. We're dedicated to providing a space that is accessible, inclusive, and free from oppression, harassment, and discrimination. In the space, we will treat each other with respect and dignity regardless of age, race, gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, levels of ability, and all our other diverse identities. Everyone entering this space has a responsibility to uphold these values. And I'd also like to make a territorial acknowledgement. The Pride PEI and the PEI Pride Festival operate in the Mi'kmaq Key, the homeland of the Mi'kmaq people. We recognize that the land on which we gather is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq First Nation, and we pay our respects to the Indigenous Mi'kmaq people of this territory, past, present, and future. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship with Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. And please be advised that this webinar is being recorded for future rebroadcast, and you may be recorded only if you engage directly with the panelists via voice or video of your own volition. By engaging, you're granting us the ability to use your recorded likeness. Thanks very much. So welcome to today's Pride Zoom on race and sexuality. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. First, we've got Sobia Ali-Faisal, our moderator, Evelyn Bradley, our first panelist, Amirah Oyesegun, our panelist, and Mengyu Zang, our fourth panelist. My name is John Kimmel, and I'm our technical director. I'm going to do a better job of deleting vestigial slides. I want to thank Shannon Snow, our Pride board member, who is the event organizer, and Kate Norman is going to be available in chat as a facilitator. Some basic ground rules. You have 2 features available to you here in Zoom. Feel free to use the chat box to message all our panelists and participants. Make sure you selected that option to message all panelists and participants to chat with any of the other members who are attending here, as well as to the group here as well. If you'd like to send a message to those of us moderating the chat, just message all panelists. Feel free to get noticed at any time. You can jump in and use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your desktop app or in the top right-hand corner of your mobile screen when you tap on your screen, or you can use the hand raise tool. I'll be keeping an eye out there, and so will Kate, to bring details to Sobia's attention. Don't hesitate to use that all panelists feature again for any private messages. And just a reminder that we are recording. I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to mute my microphone and throw things over to Sobia. Over to you, Sobia.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Shannon was.
Yeah, so actually, I'm just going to jump in quickly first here just to introduce Sobia. I have a little bio here written by her. So Sobia Ali-Faisal is the co-founder of BIPOC Usher, co-creator of MAC Research, a social justice-based social research consultancy, and founder of SAHA, Muslim Sexual Health Network, which is launching this summer. She has her PhD in applied social psychology from the University of Windsor, where she examined the psychological sexual health of young Muslim adults in Canada and the United States. Her recent work focuses on strategies to decolonize psychological knowledge, specifically exploring masculinity among cis Muslim men and its relation to sexual violence against women and sexual health of Muslims. She has conducted workshops on decolonizing consent and is currently co-writing a book on the sexual health of Muslims. So thanks so much for joining us, Sobia.
Thank you so much for asking me. I'm really excited to be moderating this event. I'm really excited actually to learn tonight because I know that our panelists have a lot of wisdom to offer. And so I'm really excited about this. So thank you so much. I will get right into introducing our panelists tonight because I know everyone here is here to hear them speak and to learn from them. Some of them were introduced a little bit earlier by John, and so I'm just going to go into a little more detail. I will read you their bios that they offered us. So beginning with Mengyu. So Mengyu is a computer science student at UPEI who believes in science. She's an explorer of literature and religion who likes Sao Shuichin think I pronounced that all right. It's an Italo Calvino. She's a lesbian with more male friends than female friends, a Chinese who would buy a new food item every time she goes to the superstore, a human who doesn't believe in God but is open to the unknown. Being different isn't what she means to be. It happens to be the result of being herself. So welcome, Mengyu. And then we have Amirah. And Amirah is a Black leftist queer Muslim woman and is currently undergoing training to be a sex health educator using an anti-oppression, anti-capitalist, and racialized lens. Amirah believes that white supremacy created a system designed to destroy Black bodies. As Black people, it is important, she says, for Black people to reclaim their bodies, their sexuality, and their pleasure, which is a direct opposition or is in direct opposition to the system and is an act of resistance. And finally, we have Evelyn, and Evelyn prides herself in her hand-tied bow ties and Southern gentleman aesthetic. As a graduate of the oldest women's college in the US, Salem College, she has been an 8th grade English teacher and an at-risk youth advocate for the past 5 years. She recently moved from the American South to PEI with her wife and is looking to grow the Charlottetown community with her unique perspective on race and intersectionality. So welcome to everyone to this panel. And I will get started again with the questions right away because we are all here to listen to our speakers. So the first question that we have is fairly general and fairly broad, and you can answer in whatever way you feel comfortable. Again, we know you have so many wonderful insights to share. So the first question is, how do you think about your sexuality in the context of your race and vice versa? So how you think about your race in the context of your sexuality. And I will open it up to whoever would like to begin the conversation.
I don't mind going first. So when I originally got this question, it's really interesting to me because I have a bit of a different experience with blending these two things, as it wasn't really a choice. So as somebody from the United States, those two entities are often intertwined in different contexts, be it professional or your personal life. So for me, I never looked at my sexuality as separate from my racial identity. For me, they're all kind of layered on top of each other. I like to think about it like a cake. I like desserts. So I think about it a lot more like a cake and less kind of like a slice of pie in that way. So they kind of mesh together to create this singular identity that I navigate spaces.
Thank you. That's interesting. So your Americanness is also a part of that conversation as well. So it's not, it's a very nuanced and complicated conversation.
100%. Well, and in a lot of spaces in the United States, I don't have the privilege of them being separate. When I walk into a room, it's very evident that I happen to be a queer Black woman. It doesn't go anywhere. And so in a lot of ways, those identities, even if I wanted them to be separate, in spaces like that, it's very unlikely that I would have the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you. Who would like to go next? Because I suspect that's going to come up. I feel like that's going to come up again and again, the nationality part, the where we are from, where we're raised, all of the expectations around that as well. Mengyu, I noticed you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm from China, and I was born in like a small town in China. I'm not from a big city. So I think I was born as a lesbian. Of course, there is some exploration period when I was a kid. But after I grew up, I'm very sure that I'm a lesbian. And after I came here, I think the environment is very different, and the culture and no matter the gay culture or in general, the culture is very different. So I think the experience is very different for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you compare like the Chinese context to the Canadian or the maybe PEI context.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amirah.
Hi. So when I first saw that question, I was super confused because I couldn't think of anything because I felt like there was so much to consider and it felt so overwhelming that I had nothing. It was just like, how do I think of my sexuality in the context of my race? And like the first thing that struck me is that I don't want to. Like, I wish I lived in a world where like these things don't matter, but unfortunately, I'm stuck here and I don't live in a world where these things don't matter. So for me, it's been, as opposed to my race, it's mostly like my Africanness or like being Muslim and queer, because it's kind of like, you can be Muslim and queer, or like because I'm Nigerian, and so in Nigeria, it's like, how dare you? Like, how dare you be a certain way? So in the end, for me, I just think it's just such a stressful situation to be in. It's like having to navigate through all of these things that you don't want to navigate through. Like, I just don't want, like I said, like, I wish I lived in a world where it wasn't a thing and like these weren't things that we had to like constantly consider. But like if I have to like consider, which I always do, it's more of like being African or being Muslim and queer. Like that's really how like I'm more affected. Like that's mostly how I consider all of that together.
Thank you. So it seems like there's a common theme where it's not just about race. I mean, when we think about race, like what is race? Like how do we define race? Even that concept itself is so complicated, and it's so informed by not just, you know, us and our personal experiences, but the context within which we live, within which we grow up. How is race defined where we live? Are we in the majority? Are we the minority? So one of the things that came up with that, all three of you talked about the idea of where you grew up. It's not just race, it's about being American or being Chinese or being Nigerian. But it brings that in. And what sorts of messages you're getting from others, right? So a lot of times when we talk about, when we're thinking about race, we're thinking about how do others define us. So was there a sense, is there sort of this feeling of others being able to define you and having to negotiate how others define it, having to work with that?
For me, the thing with race is that like race is a social construct and labels are a social construct. And so I think within the LGBTQ community, like labels are like accepted because those labels were created within the communities. And so like labels were created like by us, for us more oftentimes. But with race, like we all know why race is there. It's white supremacy. Like that is what put us into those categories. And so like I'm Nigerian and I grew up in Nigeria, and like I wasn't Black in Nigeria, like everyone was Black. So race wasn't always a thing that I had to consider growing up. It became a thing when I moved to Canada and I realized, oh, I'm Black, oh, I'm being treated differently. And then like adding a layer of like Muslimness on top, having to do with Islamophobia, then adding a layer of queerness on top and all of that. So yeah.
How about the others? Would you like to speak on that a bit?
I agree with her. I have a similar experience. Like when I was in China, all around me were Chinese people, most of them. And I didn't even realize that what's the meaning of being a Chinese person. And it's after I came here, I realized that, oh, I'm a Chinese. And then I always ask myself, what is a Chinese? What does this mean? And the funny thing is, I found that much of my Chinese character after I came to Canada. Yeah, so it's like being a Chinese lesbian is not like being a lesbian here, especially in Canada. Because whenever I do something, people will view it as, oh, she's a Chinese, and that's a Chinese doing something, that's a Chinese blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so this is my experience here.
So it's very, it's very informed by others' stereotypes and expectations, and there's that almost like a policing in some ways. Are you always paying attention?
Yeah, it's different. It's like, how do I put this? It's like, I was the same with other people when I was in China, but after I came here, I didn't mean to, but I become outstand.
Yeah. I think that goes back to Amirah's great point about white supremacy defining what race is. Like white supremacy has put these labels on us and decided what we are. And whereas, Amirah, as you were saying, within the queer community, there is a claiming of labels, as opposed to those being imposed on communities by white supremacy, for example, when it comes to race.
Yeah. And I think in the end, like with race, like, because when I had to think of like sexuality in the context of race, it's like most of the times, like things that have to do with race are solely based on stereotypes, like, oh, Black people have to be a certain way, Black people have to do a certain thing. But it's like, I am very different from like someone who even grew up in like South Africa. Like, we're both Black, we're both African. Half the time we don't understand what we're both saying to each other. Our cultures are very different. So in the end, like the question is, what does it mean to be Black? Aside from melanin, what does it mean to be Black? And I honestly don't know, aside from struggling with oppression, but what else does it mean to be Black? And I really don't know, because we were forced to be Black. Like, we're just people, but like the label has been imposed on us.
Evelyn, would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's definitely a level of caricature that comes into play. I think is kind of what everybody was getting at with identifying race to others and others assuming race and things like that, especially when you come to somewhere that's so tiny. So I spent the majority of my childhood in the city of Atlanta. So Atlanta, Georgia is a very large city. And so moving to smaller spaces for school and then even smaller spaces still in my adult life, it's very interesting when you meet people and you start talking about things like race and sexuality, and they start putting together all these, images in their mind of like things that they've watched or things that they assume. So I get completely what you guys were saying as far as you become this token Chinese person, I think is what you were getting at, or this token like Black person, but what even is that really? And then on top of that layer of having to be queer, it's a lot of it's an interesting way of looking at oneself, because before you ask that question, I don't think I've ever thought about myself separately as a Black queer person necessarily, or a brown queer person, outside of other people's view of what that means. So in the South, for example, a lot of racial slurs, right? It's a lot of weird looks because my wife and I happen to be an interracial couple. So there's a lot of other negativity or stereotypes that get thrown on top of that. So it's weird to think about how I view my race. I don't know. Yeah, I'm a Black person, but what does that mean? Amirah hit the nail on the head. She's like, what does that mean? I don't know. She and I are both technically Black people, but like, I don't know. So it's an interesting way of looking at it for sure.
Yeah. It seems what I'm kind of hearing when it comes to issues of race, like we're talking about, like Amirah mentioned, how white supremacy has defined these things for us, and really colonizers, they purposely simplified those they colonized, right? And those who they stole and those who they kidnapped. They purposely simplified our identities. And it seems like that, from their perspective, from that white gaze, that is still the dominant narrative around race, is that we are these either one or two dimensional beings. And that is still being imposed upon us. And yet we are left then with the angst and the turmoil of having to figure out what that means for us, because they've so dehumanized those who they colonized and kidnapped and stole and oppressed. So thank you. Anything else anyone would like to add on that question, or if we have any questions from our viewers out there? I don't think there's anything yet before we move on to the next question. question. All right, so we can move on. We can always come back. Obviously, we'll be coming back. Evelyn, you kind of hinted at this a little bit. The next question asks about your experiences here on PEI. So what has been your experience navigating communities on the island? So again, anyone can start this conversation.
I can go first again. That's fine. I think I've had the weirdest interaction on PEI only because I moved smack dab at the beginning of the entire pandemic situation. So my encounters with people on the island have been very minimal, but they've also been really positive. I've yet to go out and feel any kind of negativity or anything like that in the way that I'm used to. I think again, one of those things where the South is a very interesting place to live, and it's a very interesting place to spend time. And so coming here is completely different than what I am used to. So I feel like in a lot of ways, I am a child in my, interactions and interpretations of PEI, because everybody's so nice and everybody's every Canadian stereotype I've ever heard, right? But I've also gone downtown maybe 3 times. So again, it's a very limited view of this overall spectrum I think that PEI has to offer.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next again. Yeah, so I have two things that I want to share. The first thing is I found there are much misunderstandings towards Chinese people and Chinese lesbian. And people, I came across some questions that people asked me, and they say, oh, how's the gay people living in China? Is the government treating you bad, or will you be punished by the government? So this is not a political topic, but I just want to share my personal experience. Well, the actual thing is, I feel it's okay of being gay and living in China. Because I came out to my parents and my friends, and of course my close friends. And I don't do that like, I put a sign on my head and say, oh, hey, I'm gay, I'm lesbian. Nobody does that, right? It's just when people ask me, I tell them, oh, hey, I'm gay. And if my friends, they disagree on that, that's okay. Maybe we'll no more friends again. And I came out to my coworkers, and things I worked in a bigger city, so it's more open-minded there than my hometown. And from what I've known in China, I was living with my partner for a few years in China. We can live together quite freely, and we can buy properties together. And if we want, we can even have kids. But we can't get married. It's like, it's not legal, but it's not illegal either. Yeah, so this is my experience. Other gay people in China may have different opinions, but from my experience, I think my gay experience in China is safe and happy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and after I came to Canada, I've noticed that PEI, my experience in Canada is mostly in PEI. And PEI, I find people is, yeah, of course, they are nicer. And people will say hello to you on the street. We don't do that in China. Yeah, and it's more open-minded here. People are more open-minded. Mm-hmm. And the most important thing is you can marry with anybody you want. Mm-hmm. I personally, marriage isn't that important for me, but I think it might be important for other people, for other gay people. If I want to get married someday, I could do that, right? So this is one thing I've noticed, and I enjoy it very much. And another thing is the gay thing is commonly accepted here in PEI. And then when you say, oh, hey, I'm gay, people will just like, yeah, that's nothing. Yeah.
No, so I'm so glad to hear that your experiences and Evelyn's experiences so far. I know with limited experience due to the pandemic, obviously, but have been so positive. That's really wonderful, wonderful to hear. Amirah.
Yeah. So, okay, if I compare like what it was navigating like the queer community in Nigeria as opposed to here, it's not nice in Nigeria. Like in Nigeria is illegal, but like luckily no one takes the law seriously. Like I've never personally heard of anyone like going to jail for being gay. Like personally, like I don't know if it's happened, but I've personally never heard of a situation. It's mostly like just like within the community, like they'd be young, but I was a lot young when I moved here, so I never really like explored like the idea of being queer, because like at least within my family, like that was completely unacceptable. Like no one hear none of that. But with being here on the island, like second year, like I told someone that, oh, like I'm queer, blah, blah, blah. And then they said, oh, you don't look queer. But then again, it was, what does that even mean? Like, how, like, I am female and I am quite feminine, but the idea of queerness suddenly like, oh, piercing, trying to fit people into boxes. And I don't know whether this person was queer or not. I never asked the person, but for me, that was just actually quite irritating. And so for so long, I just left the whole like telling people anything about queerness, because I didn't want any of that like, oh, but you don't look queer, because I didn't know what queer was supposed to look like. Like I'm very feminine and I enjoy being this way. It's not imposed. I genuinely enjoy being this way. And so I find it's been relatively easy on the island. Like it's easier navigating queerness as opposed to navigating being a Black person on like queer is a lot easier.
Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit, so I'm
of queerness as opposed to person.
Do we lose Amirah frozen?
My Wi-Fi.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So you kind of bring up that definition that others defining. Again, like what is like for that person? Sorry. Are we okay?
Hi, Amirah. We're just, I think we're just getting a little bit of a delay as the connection tries to catch up. If it's all right, Amirah, I'm just going to turn off your video. That's going to prioritize your audio just for a sec, and you can always rejoin us if the connection gets better. Sorry to jump in, Sobia.
No worries. Thank you. Yeah. So should we continue? Are we good to go? Amirah, do we still have your audio?
She's still showing us connected, but please keep going, and I'll see if I can connect with Amirah separately, but we'll get her back on.
Sure. Yeah, so Amirah brought up a really interesting point again, is that idea of, once again, kind of being labeled or having others having expectations of what you're supposed to be as a queer person, and that experience on PEI. So I think this is a common experience when you have marginalized identities, that others who don't share that identity oftentimes have these stereotypes and assumptions about what that identity is supposed to be. And there is often that imposition of, what they think you're supposed to be, and having to navigate that. I'm wondering if anyone else wanted to speak to that before. Actually, I wanted to, after this, go to a question from our viewers. We have a question from our viewers based related to some of this conversation. But before we do, does anyone else want to speak to the idea of that imposition again when it comes to, like, specifically on PEI, if you've had that kind of experience at all?
I will say something that I'm starting to learn while being here is that everybody's aesthetic is a little bit different than I'm used to. Again, so spending all the time I spent in Atlanta, you know, my aesthetic is very indicative of that, you know, Southern gentleman style of dress. And so I do find that here people are more polite, but it's definitely still confusing because I'm 6'1", so I walk into a room and I have this bow tie and people are like, what? This is PEI. We wear bathing suits like to breakfast. Like, I'm confused. So it's a little bit of like a clash with, I think, the societal norms in that respect. But again, it's such night and day here for me dealing with just average people at a restaurant or you know, when my wife and I are out to grab a coffee. It's a very different environment when it comes to people's like openly being opinionated or feeling like they can share however they feel that day about whatever it is they think that they're seeing. It's very different for me.
Okay, thank you. So, oh, sorry, Mengyu.
Yeah, thank you. I don't feel something like that. Maybe I'm fitting the gay stereotype of their imagination very well. But whenever I came out to people on PEI, I don't see them very surprisingly.
Okay, well, it's welcome. I'm assuming it's nice to have people just accept. Yeah. So one question that we have from someone, one of our viewers, is what have been, and this is related to this question, what have been the greatest obstacles or challenges you've faced to feeling at home on PEI? And what does PEI need to do to become more welcoming and inclusive in your view? So obstacles and challenges you faced, and then what could be done? What could PEI do to be more welcoming and inclusive? Would like to, I don't want to, Evelyn, I want to pick on you because you always go first. So maybe Amirah? Okay, here we go.
Yeah, like that, as soon as you read out the question, my eyes just went wide, like, oh, where do I start from? And so, like I said, like I have had more difficulty navigating as a Black person as opposed to like navigating as a queer person, because like queer is not written on my forehead, but like you're only gonna know if I tell you, because I fit into the whole like being very feminine and like non-queer or whatever that means. So I've had more obstacles navigating like as a Black person, and so it stems from those like stereotypes of being angry or just a whole bunch. And like anyone who's been active with like the whole like Black Lives Matter movement on the island knows that I've been fairly active with that as well. And so I feel like at this stage, as of now, what is important is for people on the island to actually listen, because I feel that people are hearing us, but they're not actually listening. And there's so much resistance because it always comes across as like our issue is with whiteness. And I have no problem with whiteness. Like, frankly, I could care fucking, no, frankly, I could care less. Frankly, I could care less about whiteness. My issue is white supremacy. And so the moment you talk about like white supremacy and the moment, like, because I always say like my motto in life is like, I have thrown out white fragility and white comfort. Like I care very little about white comfort. But the moment you start to talk about like things that have to do with race, the next thing that comes up is like there's that defense, like there's that resistance. Well, I haven't done anything. And I constantly say like, it is systemic. Like it is not you, the individual. Like you, as an individual, have absolutely no power over me. Like what are you gonna do to me? Like you have no power over me. But the problem is that if you did do anything, the system would pick your voice over mine. The system here is your voice as opposed to mine. Like, you know, that statement, a voice was voiceless. Like, marginalized people are not voiceless. We're just not being heard. You're not listening. And so for a lot of people on the island, like, they need to start by listening and educating themselves. Like, there's so many resources out there. Please don't ask your Black friends to educate you. We're tired. We have a lot more stuff going on in our own personal lives. So honestly, that's what the island needs to do. Like, people on the island just need to listen, because you're hearing us, but you're not listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Evelyn, I saw you agree. Very.
Yes, I unmuted myself before you even called on me. I think that there's a benefit, especially on the island, when it comes to people benefiting from colorism here specifically. The one thing I've noticed is a little bit different than the South, is that here the response to colorism is very much applauded, and there's a level of like, oh, well, if we could, you know, smile, but also continue these kinds of things where we aren't actively listening to people who we don't think look like we should be listening to them, is very prevalent. And I will challenge Amirah to think bigger. I don't want them to just listen. I find that here specifically, there's, you know, this noun that we always use called diversity, but without the action of actively being inclusive, it doesn't actually do much. I've spent a long time in a country where people simply talk and listen. And at this point in my life and at this stage in my life, what I want for myself and the future of my family is for there to be some action that goes with it. And I think that definitely kind of cutting down some of the de facto segregation that is here specifically in companies and in organizations and on boards, I think that's going to be the obstacle that PEI has to swallow. And it's going to be a pill that's a little bit more difficult to swallow than I think people realize. Right? We don't need, you know, the token person of color on a board. That's not the goal, right? The goal isn't just to sit in a circle and for somebody white to buy me a coffee to listen about my story. What I want you to do is, instead of sending your whole staff to a diversity training, I actually want you to get in there and do the work of dismantling these fundamental ideas that you've been using to govern yourself for an extended period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know go ahead, Mengyu, and then.
Okay, sorry about this.
No.
This is really a great question. When I saw this question, I just feel like I have a lot of stuff to say. Well, I don't even know where I should start from. I can give two examples. The challenges I've faced is not about my gayness, it's about being a Chinese people, it's being Asian. Mm-hmm. One example is whenever I go to a restaurant with my white friends, the waitress or waiter, they always ask them. They never looked at me. Even though I could speak English. Oh, I know my English isn't good, but I could speak, right? They always ask me, oh, what do you want? What does she want? They never, I've been to many restaurants here, but I've noticed if there is a white person beside me, no matter it's a she or her, they always ask them. So I know they're nice, but it's just like, it doesn't feel right, you know, and you feel be ignored.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, just a second, that's like the biggest problem I have with the island is like, there's already that stereotype that they're nice, but like, I could care less if you smile at me or wave at me. Like, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for actual systemic change, like starting with listening and then people educating themselves and then being able to educate other people. And so starting right from like elementary school to like, I don't know how the school system here works, but like primary school and secondary school, whatever people call it here, but starting from there, like, it's so important. But like, I feel like a lot of islanders already think that they're nice, but racism is systemic. Like I have said, it's not individual. And so you being nice to me really doesn't do much for me. Like, I remember after like the march, like the Black Lives Matter march that we had, there were so many more people like smiling and waving at me on the streets, like what it like times when like you're at the other side of the street and it's completely unnecessary. They just be like, being nice to this Black person. Like, we don't need that. It was so irritating.
So funny. It's like being nice almost, that's all I need to do. That's it. It's like, okay, I'm nice. That I'm done. I'm done doing my part of the work. Yeah.
Oh.
Mengyu, no, go ahead.
Yeah. I prefer them being true than being nice. Like you can just view me as a person, not a strange creature or something. Like the more I've been living in both different cultures and countries, the more I lived in PEI, which is another culture for me, the more I feel people are just people. Maybe we have different cultures, we came from different backgrounds, and we don't eat the same food, but we are just people.
Yeah. It's what I'm noticing is there's this sense of dehumanization, right? Even in the niceness, even when they, it's almost like, you know, even when people are nice, if that's all they're doing, then they're still seeing you as based on your identity, that particular identity. And it denies your complexity as a human. It denies that part, the multiple parts of you, and it really minimizes you to this one part of your identity. Nonetheless, even in the niceness, it's like quote unquote positive stereotypes. These are still dehumanizing. They are still oppressive. They are still wrong. So it's that niceness kind of equals those positive stereotypes that people have about marginalized people. It's functioning in that same oppressive way. It's functioning in that same dehumanizing way.
I completely agree. I come from a place that definitely has coined the phrase nice nasty. That's what we call it in the South, right? It's that sweet tea, right? It's super sweet, but it might rot your teeth. Those kinds of concepts that really limit what people can do. And I think that concept of that obstacle of getting to the heart of intersectionality is going to be the thing that really either makes or breaks PEI. Because you're right. I also, when, gay marriage became legal in the United States, literally 5 years ago. It's one of those things where it's entertaining because you meet strangers in public who are like, I'm so proud of you. And I'm like, you don't even know who I am. Like, what? I don't, thanks. I could be a terrible person, but you just told me you were proud of me because I'm wearing a bow tie. Thank you so much. And it kind of belittles that piece of you also, I find. When I find that people, especially like Amirah was saying, when you walk across the street or you're doing something, and random white people are like, good for you. You're like, it's Tuesday. Like, thanks for minimizing my experience to something that can be validated by you as a stranger to meet casually on a Tuesday. Like, thanks. I feel real empowered to go, apply for a job that I know I may or may not get because of my skin tone. Like, thanks. Right. So it's an interesting dichotomy for sure.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you said that you as a stranger think you can validate me, right? It's almost like, again, they are confirming that marginalized peoples, racialized peoples need their validation, to actually feel a value.
Correct. When in actuality, it's about them. You want to be able to tell your friends that you're not racist, so you wave at strange Black people on the street in hopes that checks that box for you, so you can go home and continue to not hire people and continue to not do the things that you need to do in your office and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, I also really feel like heteronormativity and like beauty standards have really like clouded people's brains, and they're not able to see beyond like even the simplest of things. And so what happened more recently was that like I stopped shaving my legs this summer. I said this summer I refused to shave my legs because it cost me too much money and I'm poor. So I decided like I'm not going to shave my legs. And then just last week someone told me like, oh, you don't shave your legs, you're so brave. Like Like, what even is that statement? Like, it was never my intention to be brave. Like, I realized I wasn't doing it for myself, and now I just don't want to do it anymore. And then you're like, you're so brave. And it's like, that is a function of heteronormativity. Like, heteronormativity created these standards for, like, aside from being like Black or queer, like for women, like as a woman, you have to do a certain thing. And then you not doing that thing is like an act of resistance. It's like, I'm not resisting anything. I just don't want to shave my legs.
Exactly. It's interesting.
Yeah, I feel you. Like about shaving legs, I never shaved my legs. When I came here, my lesbian friend asked me, she's Welsh and she's local. She asked me, why don't some Chinese people shave their legs? And I was like, some of them do, but some of us don't. But I never thought it's like a serious thing. You can do either shave it or not. But in the Western standard, if you don't shave it, you are being brave.
Yeah. I think they're not able to see past that because, like, I'm Nigerian, and in a lot of Nigerian cultures, like, no one really cares. Like, no one really cares whether or not you shave your legs. It's really nobody's business. But like here, like, there's that, like, there are those beauty standards that women have to fit into, and it's like nobody wants to. It's stressful and it costs money. So
go ahead, Evelyn.
Oh, I was just, it's so fascinating how different the viewpoint is. I'm seeing that people are like loving the conversation in the chat. I'm personally loving this conversation because I understand in a lot of ways how your aesthetic can be a radical form of defiance. You know, as a woman who wears ties all the time, when somebody tells me, they're like, yeah, good job for the tie, like that's radical. It very much is when you are thinking about small towns in the United States where people are very closed-minded, very narrow-minded. The simple act of wearing a tie and trying to pick a restroom in the States is a very radical thing. So I get that concept of, you know, your aesthetic being a form of protest, if you will, whether it's on purpose or not. Because for me, I don't put on a tie every day thinking, yeah, it's really gonna mess with somebody's grandma. Like that's not what's happening. But I can understand how that then gets viewed by strangers as a very much, you know, stab or FU to the kinds of concepts of patriarchy and beauty.
That's interesting. So we have a question that ties into this a little bit. So when you're talking about aesthetic and that being a way of resisting, what oftentimes we're thinking about when it comes to expectations with heteropatriarchy, we're also thinking about white supremacist, capitalist heteropatriarchy that has been imposed by colonizers, European colonizers, an understanding of the gender dichotomy and how sexuality is even understood has been informed by colonizers, right? And been informed by Europeans and has been informed by that whiteness, that white supremacy. So the question we have, it kind of ties into this idea of decolonizing. So the question is, in your experiences, what does it mean to decolonize your desire? You could either talk about desire or just decolonizing. When we're talking about this conversation of sexuality and race, what does it mean to decolonize that? How do we get rid of that colonial influence, and how do we talk about that?
Well, first things first with that question, because with like my sex ed training and the things that I've been learning, even like just on my own, it's very much centered around like decolonizing like Black bodies, decolonizing sex and all these things. So first is like refusing to fit into those stereotypes. Like, do not fit into those stereotypes. Like, there isn't one way to be a certain thing. There isn't one way to be a woman. There isn't one way to be Black. There's not one way to be anything. And then also, what was I gonna say? Like with like Black bodies and sex, enjoying sex really, because I think like that is one of the biggest acts of resistance. Because I'd always thought about how like while Black people were slaves for 400 years, like no one was like, we were made to have sex to reproduce and like produce more labor. Like it wasn't about pleasure, it wasn't about anything, just have sex and reproduce. And so I feel like it's very important for us to like reclaim our bodies, reclaim our sexualities, and like reclaim pleasure and like take away that guilt from pleasure. Because I think about like my culture, my traditional culture, like pre-colonial, because I'm Yoruba, so pre-colonial Yoruba culture, what was sex like? Like we need to demystify sex. That's the thing. And like once we demystify sex, we're able to demystify like sexuality and things surrounding genitals. So it's so important to like demystify it, like resist, like sex is an act of resistance, like pleasure is an act of resistance for people of color, like demystify like it. I think it's so important because I think about like my own culture, like pre-colonial culture, and how like sex wasn't like a thing of secrecy, it wasn't a thing of shame. Like you couldn't shame, like you couldn't shame someone for sex, but now like that is such a thing, like shaming people for sex and their sexuality and all those things. So pleasure and demystifying sex.
Perfect. Thank you. Evelyn, I saw you agreeing at a couple of points.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that in addition to just, demystifying these myths that surround, sex and desire in general, I think that demystifying other desires, career goals, aesthetic, I think that unfortunately when one talks about decolonizing individuals' identities, or just the way that they get to be perceived, is such a powerful concept because, you've got a whole group of individuals who feel like they can't be CEOs, they can't be at these tables because somebody owns the table, except for nobody owns the table. That's not how it works. And so I think this concept of really getting to the heart of ownership and what that looks like, and then decolonizing what someone assumes it belongs to them is really the heart of what that means. You got to get rid of, throw out the myth that it belongs to somebody in the first place. I remember talking to one of my friends just about why I choose to wear bow ties as somebody who grew up in the South, as somebody who grew up Baptist, dealing with all of the social stereotypes associated with an African-American person in the South, in the church setting, and the history of all of those things. And I'm like, because the bow tie is the way to do that, right? This bow tie doesn't belong to anybody. This aesthetic doesn't belong to anybody. It's mine. And so by being able to express that and kind of poke holes in this understanding that because colonizers in a lot of ways have shaped what we view as right or wrong, or shaped how we view gender versus sexuality versus identity, doesn't mean those things have to apply to you. And I think getting over that hump of actually these things don't apply to me, you don't own them, is the key to kind of deconstructing this belief system.
Thank you. Mengyu, would you like to?
Yeah, I think decolonize my desire. To me, it means be myself. When I was in China, be myself means being gay in a communist country. And that, as I just said, it's not a terrible thing, but it still needs some courage. So that's what I defend being myself. And after I come here, I think it's kind of the opposite thing. It's like being Chinese. When the first year when I come here, I always observe what other people do. And I have a feeling that if I don't do the same as what they do, they will feel you like weirdo. So I kind of learned what they do things, and then I learned from them. But now I feel like if I view Canada and PEI as my second home, I shouldn't do that. I should just be myself. A home isn't a place that everybody does the same thing. It should be everybody does whatever they want.
Right. Yeah.
So now I just do whatever I want, and you feel, oh, that's a Chinese weird thing. Okay, yeah, yes, I am Chinese.
Yeah. So being yourself as a form of resistance, just being who you are as a
Yeah.
form of resisting oppression.
Yeah, and I don't care. I become more and more don't care of what other people think.
Yeah, that sounds very similar, Evelyn. I think what you were saying too, just refuse to accept that oppression, well, the colonial understandings of who you are. Just refuse to and be who you are as a form of resistance. Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. Would anyone like to add anything else before I move on to the next question? All right, so I will go to the next one because I am sure there are many younger racialized islanders who are watching or who will watch at some point. So the next question is, what would you like to say to younger racialized islanders who are exploring their sexuality?
Can I go first?
Okay.
Yeah. I know there are some younger Chinese people and Asian people, and they are queer, but even though their family immigrated here on PEI, but their parents are even older generation, their grandparents, they don't really agree with the gay thing. Well, I think they are facing some difficulties of coming out or be themselves. I can share my experience of coming out. Like I said, I come from a small, how do I say? Sorry, I come from a small place in China, and it's not that developed, and people there are not very open-minded, and so do my parents. And the thing I did to come out to them is step by step. I first told my mom that, oh, Mom, maybe I don't want to have child in the future. My mom was like, okay. And then a few years later, I told her, Mom, I don't even want marriage. By marriage, I mean that a man and a woman. And my mom was like, you should think about that. Then a few years later, I told my mom, Mom, I think I may be gay. And my mom was like, she was shocked, but since I have made so many preparation, it's not as that shock as I come out to her all of a sudden. Yeah, and my dad, he is more open-minded than my mom. And I told him directly and said that maybe I'm gay. And my dad was like, okay, don't tell your mom. And even now, my dad still asks me sometime, are you still gay? And I was like, yes, Dad, I'm still gay, not straight yet. So I understand them. Like my dad once said, we accept you not because we agree with the gay thing or we understand the gay thing. We don't. It's just because you are our daughter. That's fun to me because they understand me and I understand them too. Like growing up from their background and the education they accept and the society and the environment they lived in is totally different from mine. So I understand how difficult for them to accept me. And if we can have different opinions and they could disagree on gay people, but as long as they accept me and they don't hurt anybody else, I'm okay with that. Yeah, so I think the older generation, the Asian older generation on the island, they must be more open-minded than my parents.
Okay.
But things we have a different culture and they are not grown up from here. So maybe the younger generations need to understand each other. I mean, as long as you love each other, well, if you have a very bad parent, then you can do, maybe you just don't care. But if you know that your parent loves you, you should talk and communicate with them and have some patience. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So there's a need for the intergenerational, navigating that intergenerational, the gap that's there a little bit, but patience needed on both sides, I guess, to really navigate that and to try to understand the other as well. Yeah, thank you. What other advice did you have, Evelyn, Amirah?
On one hand, like, I believe that everyone should be able to live their truths and be who they truly are. But then on another hand, I feel like it's very important to like prioritize your safety. In the end, like if you're a young queer person on this island, if your parents are Nigerian, I'll speak to those if your parents are Nigerian. I feel like you should know your parents. So like, cause I have a friend who's Nigerian and he's gay, but they moved to the South in the US, which isn't any better. And then he just casually like told his parents like, oh, like my friend came out as gay very recently, and then his parents went off. So like, honestly, like those are not the kind of parents you tell these things to be honest. Like I think it's important for everyone to live like their own truths, but like honestly, like it's important to think about it critically. Like, what is, like, are your parents the kind that would kick you out? Do they want to send you to conversion therapy? Would they not pay for your college? Like, there's so many things to consider. Like, for now, like, my parents don't know nothing, and I'm an international student, so my parents pay for not everything, but my parents do, like, they're my sponsors, basically. Like, they take care of, like, a significant amount of my finances, and frankly speaking, I'm not willing to risk anything, at least not right now. Like, I'm not in a position where, like, because I know, like, they'd always love me no matter what, like, they would always love me, but then, like, is there still going to be that stability in our relationship? So I'd have to think, like, would I still have financial stability from them? If I don't have financial stability, how would that affect my stay in Nigeria, like here in Canada? Would I have to go back to Nigeria? Like, there's just so many things like you have to consider. And to any young queer person here, like, first, I think you should find like a queer community outside of your home. So like, make friends with other queers on the island, and then when the time is right, like, you should know, but like prioritize your safety. Like, that is the most important thing, because I have heard like terrible stories about people coming out to their parents in Nigeria and it not ending well, like some people being homeless. And it's so sad that like this is something that you'd have to consider when coming out, but people's parents are very different, and in the end, like, in your heart, you know how your parents are going to react to it. And if you know their reaction is not going to be nice, please wait until you don't have to depend on them and until you're outside their house. I beg of you, like, don't just do it. And like, it is important. Like, I want you to live your truth. Like, I honestly really do. But like, your safety, like your physical safety and your well-being should be a priority. So find supports outside of your family for now, until you're able to like stand your own ground by yourself and just get out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, for many younger people, maybe they think it's either right or wrong, but the real life is not like that. It's not like a black or white. It's very complicated. You have to consider so many things, and you need to take things step by step. And sometimes you need to balance all of the things in your life.
Yeah. Thank you. Evelyn, would you like to add to that conversation?
Sure. As somebody who spent a long time in the classroom, because I can tell you 5 years in the school classroom feels like 20, it's one of those things that I actually dealt with a lot as somebody who is openly queer and having students come to me and ask me this question of what do I do and how do I navigate these spaces and don't I have a right to be myself? All of these really important, hard questions. And my advice is always the same, which is knowing your truth is the only thing that actually matters. Now, with that comes the responsibility of making choices. And that's where what Amirah is saying is so important, because safety is important. Financial security is important. Despite what pop music tells you, love is not enough. You do not want to be in a cardboard box. It's not anybody's dream. But at the same time, knowing your truth and accepting your truth is first and foremost the most important thing as far as moving forward. And when you unapologetically claim your space, as you evolve in your identity and as you evolve as a person, I think that that's where the true advice comes. Here in the States, we did this campaign a couple years ago. It gets better. I don't know if they did something like that in Canada, but there's this whole campaign about how it gets better. It's like, actually, you just grow up and you don't care what other people think anymore. You have to put yourself in a position to do that, right? You have to put yourself in a position to be financially independent, to be safe, to be in safe spaces. And I always tell my students is that, it's one thing to wear a bow tie and go into a city. It's completely different to drive, 45 minutes south of the biggest city and do the same thing. And I don't own my truth anymore if I put myself in danger. My truth is still mine. It's still real to me. It's still very valid and relevant. But it doesn't have to mean that I have to put myself in a position to not be safe.
Right. Yeah. So safety, Amirah, you had pointed out something, and I wanted to tie in a question, sort of change the question a little bit around, just to tie it in with this. So you had said how important it is to find your community, a queer community. Would having queer and trans, BIPOC only spaces be something that would be helpful, something that would help not just for the younger racialized folks who are trying to navigate this, but just in general for the community as well? Would it be important to have those specific closed spaces specifically for BIPOC folks who are queer and or trans?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it is very important because with identifying as a marginalized person, there is vulnerability. And sometimes, a lot of times, if you're not able to share these things with your family, you have to keep it in and you have to constantly be strong. Nobody wants to be strong. We don't want to be strong. We want to cry. We want to be vulnerable. We want to be babies. That's what we want to be. But with having queer BIPOC only spaces, then there is more space to be vulnerable, because let's not pretend, even within the queer community, there is a certain level of racism or even anti-Blackness that exists even within those communities. And so yeah, it's important to have queer spaces, and then inside those queer spaces still have opportunity for people who are marginalized to share their own experiences, because that's when their experiences with their race intersects with their sexuality and or gender orientation.
Evelyn or Mengyu, would you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that in addition to just the dehumanization of, individuals with intersectionalities, kind of like you were saying before, it's one of those things where not being allowed to cry, not being allowed to, be reminded that you are someone else's child, and not having the ability to kind of, be in a state where you are young and an infant in a lot of ways, and to grow into the queer adult that you want to be. If there's no space in between, there's no way to support an individual through that, or scaffold an individual through that. One of the things that I can, say, I can say very few things positively about the South as far as its handling of queer issues, but something that I do think was very instrumental, especially with young people, is creating these spaces where they can go and have older queer individuals kind of, you know, guide them through some of the day-to-day struggles. Because if not, the only thing they have to go on is, you know, the representation that they see on whatever media source they're using, which, you know, may or may not reflect a true representation of them as a person. I can't tell you how excited I was when shows like Orange is the New Black came out, because it was like, oh, there are queer people who are brown. They're in jail, that sucks, but they're there, you know? And so having that kind of, you know, representation in real life is so valuable and so important to just kind of growing that individual and growing, you know, the adult too. As an adult who worked with youth, I learned more about myself through just conversations with kids about being queer and about being Black and all of these different things that I would have never challenged myself with. Because there's something to say about a teenager asking you a question about yourself that really is like, oh, now I feel weird because I'm telling this kid I don't know, but I don't know. Let me think about it. I'll get back to you. So that growth that happens on both ends is just unbelievable.
That's really powerful. Mengyu, would you like to address that question?
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful, having the closed spaces. Is, for me personally, I think that will be a safer place, and I will feel that I'm related to and I'm belong to. So I think that's a good option.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to the last question, because we don't want to go over the time here. So last year, Pride PEI celebrated its 25th anniversary. What do you see for our next 25 years? I would like to begin. Amirah, would you like to begin?
Yeah. So like, is it like 25 years like Pride, like just like the Pride PEI within what they're going to do in the next 25 years, or just as a community as a whole on the island, like what the island look like for queer people?
I think you could either way.
Like someone said, as a community. First things first, I think coming out is not we still have to do it, but I feel like even the very idea that you'd have to like, hi, I'm gay, or I don't identify as this. I think it should, like, we shouldn't have to do that. Like, it should just be like, oh, here's my girlfriend, and then everyone's like, cool. Like, I feel like that's the one thing that kind of like irks me. It's like I don't want queer people to still have to constantly do that, or say like someone's trans and then at the early stages they start dressing as like their true gender. Like, it shouldn't be a like I don't think it's a thing like you'd have to first, like, I don't think queer people should have to address their identities to other people. Like, I don't think they have to do that. And then what else? Oh, with pronouns as well. Like, I feel like baseline, like, we shouldn't like have, because I personally see like they/them as gender neutral. And so we should, like, baseline, we should try to use that and then let people tell us. And when people introduce themselves, I think they should also, like, it should be normalized for people to say their pronouns when they introduce themselves. Like, I don't know if anyone's on Twitter, like anyone who follows me on Twitter knows I basically live there. Just like 2 days ago, Elon Musk tweeted, "Pronouns suck." And everyone who knows me know that I hate Elon Musk with everything. And so it's just like, so there's still that resistance in 2020. Like, you're a billionaire, you have basically everything, and what sucks and what makes you struggle is like calling people by their correct pronouns. Like, 25 years from now, I hope that's not a thing. So yeah.
Thank you. Who would like to go next with their vision of the next 25 years for PEI and Pride PEI?
Yeah, thank you. I hope that people, no matter what race they are and no matter what identity they are, they can just be normal person. And I personally don't mind being stand out, and I love being different, but many people, they don't, they just want to be a normal person. Like maybe you walk on the street, nobody notices you, even though you are Chinese, even though you are lesbian. They will treat you as a common person.
Right. Yeah. So not to stand out. So it's interesting you say different and you don't mind being different, but it's like different but appreciated, different but seen as human nonetheless. Because very often right now, when you're seen as quote unquote different, there's a dehumanization that goes on in that as well. But be different yet still be seen as who you are, the complex human being that you are.
Yeah.
Thank you. Evelyn.
Yeah, I think that definitely normalizing intersectionality is bare minimum, right? Like we would like to think in 25 years that we as a community of PEI have gotten to the point where we can just acknowledge that everybody is three-dimensional and we can move forward from that base level, understanding of how people are and who people are. I think that there's definitely going to be a need for, the goal is, right, that conversations like this are more common, right? That they happen more frequently and in spaces that can enact change overall on the island. And I think that just representation, I would love in 25 years for the de facto segregation of PEI to kind of dissolve. And so that we can really truly see a community that is mingling and is intermingled, and people don't feel like they can't be in spaces and they don't feel like they can't, be themselves at risk of being a caricature, right? So my goal as somebody who's newly in PEI and actively getting invested in the community more and more every day is that I would love to see those kinds of tangible changes made, preferably in the next 10 years, right? So that in 25 years we could tackle something bigger. That would be the goal.
Thank you. So any last thoughts or questions? Someone has asked that if you, they're asking how can we support you, each of you personally. So if you have any personal project, anything that you on social media, if you're looking for particular freelance work on the island, if you wanted to talk about that, take a moment to talk about that and share that with our audience. So if you have anything that you're doing that you really would love to get some support and to tell people about, we would love to hear it just before we end up. Is anyone doing anything they'd like to share?
I can go. Oh, go ahead.
Nope. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Amanda. You're very sweet. I don't need that much help, but one thing I do need help is I'm not sure if you are an islander, but if you are, I'd like to get some recommendations of the delicious food here from the island, because I'm a food lover and I'm a seafood lover. Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why I came to PEI. And also I have a website, which is my name. It's last name first. It's ZANGMENGYU.com. It's my personal website. Thanks, I'm a programmer.
And what's it, your last name and then first name?
Yeah, I'll just type it. Can I type?
Yeah, you can type. I think you can type it in there. I think you can. Yeah. I don't know how. I hope it shows up. Still learning Zoom.
Oh yeah.
Perfect. Anyone else? Would you like to? Anything else you'd like to share? Any personal projects you want to plug?
Yeah, absolutely. So as somebody who's new to the island, I am transitioning out of the classroom. I love kids, but I think that best use of my unique skill set is definitely going to be with consulting work. So I've started a little freelance consulting business, doing conversations and talks with organizations and individuals and companies, just regarding diversity and intersectionality and what it means to take the next step. I think that a lot of companies and a lot of individuals with smaller businesses and things like that find that it's really daunting when you don't know something, to, you know, figure out how to best integrate these new best practices, right, and these new just common sense practices, I like to call them, into your business and incorporate that into you moving forward as an individual. And so I like to say that I'm the Black friend that you want to ask all those questions to. You know, that's me. I don't do it for free, so ask me, right? But I think that it's really good to ask somebody outside of your immediate contact groups. You get some honest feedback. You know, I have a lot of friends who are not brown, and it's really hard sometimes when they ask me questions because I'm like, I really don't want to tell my friend that they're racist, but if you're my friend, then that's what you need to hear, right? So I'm kind of adventuring and starting this new little bit of a venture here in PEI to allow myself to be a resource to people who really, truly could benefit from it. The best way to get in contact with me is definitely just my email address, which is my first name, my middle initial, which is an R, and then my last name at gmail.com.
Okay. So is there a way, I don't know if Kate or John, if we can collate that information and get it out to people, just so in case people missed it or anything? Perhaps we could do that.
I'd be happy to. Thanks very much. I'll make sure that when we do share additional details, we'll make sure we get this on social media for everyone who does follow up. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Amirah, would you like to share anything? I know you're training to be a sexual health educator, and I'm so excited about that. So anything around that perhaps, or anything else?
As of now, I do not have any personal projects that I'm currently working on. I'm in my 4th year of university, so I don't have the time to like work on personal projects. So for now, just very focused on like school and all of that. If you want to give me your money, I will collect it. But I think you should donate your money to BIPOC Usher and BCS. And besides donating your money, donate your time. I feel like you should check in to ask, like, because a lot of times, like, both BIPOC Usher and BCS have like projects that they're working on, and sometimes like within the community, if you have a significant amount of power, whether it be like law, mostly law, we do need help. Oh my God, if you're a lawyer, please contact BIPOC Usher. We need you, like an immigration lawyer, or Sobia, what other type of lawyer do we need?
Oh, we need all kinds of lawyers.
So if you're a
immigration lawyer for sure. Yes, absolutely, immigration lawyer. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so if you're willing to be like a volunteer lawyer for BIPOC Usher, thank you. We would very much appreciate that. So
yeah,
yes.
that would be great. Yeah, and someone who knows about nonprofits as well, so you can help us out a little bit.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that would be helpful. Any other last words? Anything else you'd like to share? It looks like people really, really appreciated this conversation, and so did I. I learned so much. Any last thoughts? Anything else? Just anything else you'd like to talk about?
I just want to say thank you. And this is my first time to go public on an event like this. And I enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just also want to reiterate that it's really refreshing that these are the conversations being had during Pride, especially, just acknowledging that intersectionality between people and the work being done is really fantastic.
Wonderful, thank you. And Amirah, any last departing words?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for like taking out the time to listen. And if there's one thing I want you to learn from me is that you need to be enjoying sex. If you're sexually active, you need to be enjoying sex. I find I sound dumb most of the time, but I think that is very important. Please enjoy sex. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We all really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your stories as well. Some of you shared more personal stories, so we really appreciate you opening up like that and sharing your personal stories as well. And just this really was a really interesting, really fascinating, eye-opening conversation for a lot of people, I'm sure. And just, I'm sure the beginning of many conversations on PEI that needs to be had here and that have been happening, I think, in closed spaces, but it's really great to have it here in this space as well. Sorry, there's a fruit fly in my face. John or Shannon, would you like to say anything to wrap up?
I'll pop in briefly and just reiterate everything. I know this isn't a mutual appreciation society, but I thank you everyone for not only joining and giving us the perspective and hearing your voices, but thank you for everyone who attended and for listening. I feel like this is a great conversation. It's a tough conversation and it's an important conversation, and it's a great way to kick off this year's Pride Festival. So thanks again to everyone, and I appreciate the heck out of you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for keeping things smooth.
Looking forward to seeing you all in real space sometime soon, whether you're a panelist or an attendee. Happy Pride, everyone, and have a great week.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy Pride. Bye.